I'm sorry, sir, but you're not on the guest list. The receptionist at Palazzo Gardens stared at me with a professional smile that couldn't hide the embarrassment in her eyes. Behind her, through the ornate glass doors, I could see my parents' golden wedding anniversary celebration in full swing. 50 years of marriage being celebrated in style in the most expensive hall in Chicago, overlooking Lake Michigan. My name is Greg Patterson, I'm 36 years old, I'm a financial advisor, and I just found out that I wasn't invited to my own parents' golden wedding anniversary. This after transferring $25,000 to their account last week, when my mother called crying about the unexpected costs of the party. There must be some mistake, I muttered, adjusting the Hermes tie I had bought especially for the occasion. I'm their son. Greg Patterson. The woman consulted the list on her tablet again, frowning. I have Jennifer Patterson and Michael Patterson listed as the host's children, but there's no Greg. Jennifer. My older sister, the golden princess of the family, who hadn't worked in 3 years since marrying a real estate agent. Michael, my younger brother, a perpetual master's student who, at 32, still received an allowance from our parents. And me? I had been the family ATM for over a decade. Through the glass, I recognized my father's Armani suit and my mother's Chanel dress. Clothes I had financed during her temporary difficulties the previous year. The decor was stunning, white orchid arrangements, crystal chandeliers, and tables covered with imported linen tablecloths. All paid for with my money. Can I speak to the event organizer? I asked, keeping my voice calm despite the turmoil inside. One moment. She disappeared through a side door, leaving me alone in the marble lobby. Other guests passed me, being greeted effusively and ushered inside. I recognized familiar faces, uncles, cousins, old family friends. All dressed elegantly, all part of a celebration from which I had been deliberately excluded. My phone vibrated. A notification from the bank confirming that the payment of $25,000 had been processed yesterday. The same amount my mother said was absolutely necessary to cover the final costs of the party. Greg, honey, you know how expensive these things are. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event, 50 years of marriage. You understand, don't you? Of course I understood. I always did. Ever since I became financially successful at the age of 25, I was the first to receive calls when emergencies arose. My parents' roof needed repair. Jennifer's car broke down just when she was short on cash. The loan for Michael to start that app startup that went bankrupt in 6 months. The receptionist returned accompanied by a man in a dark suit who introduced himself as the event manager. Mr. Patterson, I understand there is some confusion about the guest list. It's not confusion, I replied, taking out my phone and showing him the bank transfer receipt. I financed this party. $25,000 transferred last week, plus the $15,000 I sent last month for the initial deposit. The manager looked uncomfortable. Sir, our policy is very clear. We can only allow people who have been expressly authorized by the contractors to enter. The contractors are my parents. Yes, sir, but they were very specific about the list. Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. The word echoed in my mind as I watched my family celebrating through the glass. Jennifer was the center of attention, as always, telling a story that had everyone laughing. Michael was near the bar, probably drinking the scotch I had paid for. My parents circulated among the guests, accepting congratulations and hugs. If you're following this story and have been through something similar, be sure to subscribe to the channel to see how it all unfolds. What happened next completely changed my perspective on family and money. I decided I needed to understand what was really going on. If they didn't want to include me in the party, I would find out why. And then I would do something I should have done a long time ago. I got in my car and drove to a cafe across the street, where I had a perfect view of Palazzo Gardens. I needed to process what had just happened and watch my family from afar. Sitting by the window with a bitter coffee that perfectly matched my mood, I began to connect the dots of a pattern I had ignored for years. I opened my banking app and started reviewing the transfers from the last few months. $40,000 for the golden wedding anniversary. $12,000 for the urgent repair of the air conditioning at my parents' house in July. $8,000 to help Jennifer with her children's school expenses. $15,000 for Michael to invest in another doomed project. And that was just from the last 4 months. My phone rang. It was James, my best friend since college and the only family member who really cared about me, technically my father's half-brother, but raised separately. "Greg, man, did you get to the party? I'm here and I don't see you. Are you inside?" My voice betrayed the bitterness I was trying to control. "Sure, I got here an hour ago. Why do you sound surprised?" "Because I'm standing outside. They won't let me in. Apparently, I'm not on the guest list." Silence on the other end of the line. "That's impossible. You're their son." That's what I thought. "Hang on, I'll find out what's going on." While James investigated inside, I continued to analyze my financial history. Over the past 10 years, I had transferred $283,000 to my family. Nearly $300,000 for emergencies, investment opportunities, and special celebrations. I remembered my mother's phone call 3 weeks ago. "Greg, honey, you know how your father gets about money. These party costs are getting out of hand, and we don't want to disappoint our friends. You've always been our most responsible son, the only one we can count on for these things." Responsible. Trustworthy. Words I had interpreted as love, but now sounded like synonyms for convenient. James called back 20 minutes later, his voice heavy with indignation. "Greg, you won't believe what I just heard." "Tell me." "I was standing near your parents' table when someone asked about you. Your mother said, and I quote, 'We decided to keep the party more intimate, just for people who are really part of our social life.' Greg is very focused on his work. He wouldn't feel comfortable in that kind of environment." My fist automatically clenched around the phone. Social life that I financed. It gets worse. Jennifer was laughing and said you wouldn't even notice the difference because you're always too busy to show up anyway. That's a lie. I had canceled important meetings to be present at the last 3 family celebrations. My mother's 60th birthday, Jennifer's son's graduation, my cousin's wedding. Always present, always paying, always treated like a second-class guest. "And there's more," James continued. "Michael was telling a group how he convinced you to invest in his startup. He called you the family's personal bank, and everyone laughed." Personal bank. The words hit me like a punch in the stomach. That was exactly what I was to them. Not a son, not a brother. A financial resource to be exploited and then ignored when it wasn't convenient. Through the cafe window, I watched a group of guests step outside to smoke in the Palazzo Gardens. I recognized my Uncle Robert, who had lent me $5,000 last year to cover a medical emergency, and never mentioned it again. Next to him was my cousin Diana, whom I had helped with the down payment on her house. Everyone was there. All the people I had helped financially over the years were celebrating with my parents, while I, the one who had actually made the party possible, stood outside, excluded and humiliated. "James, I need to ask you a favor," he said when he came back to the phone. "Anything, man. Can you discreetly find out how much they said they spent on the party? And who else contributed financially? I'll look into it." While I waited, I opened my laptop and started creating a detailed spreadsheet. Every transfer, every loan, every temporary help. Date, amount, recipient, justification given. The pattern that emerged was devastating. I was systematically used and then discarded. My mother's phone call from last week came back to me with disturbing clarity. "Greg, you're the only one who can help us with these final costs. We know you understand the importance of family." Family. They used that word like a magic key that opened my wallet, but apparently didn't open the doors to the events I was financing. James called again. I got the information. According to your mother, they saved for years for this party and got some contributions from close relatives, but she didn't specify amounts or names. Saved up. Contributions from close relatives. More lies to hide the fact that I had paid for this $50,000 celebration almost entirely on my own. I closed my laptop with a decision crystallizing in my mind. For 10 years, I had allowed them to treat me like a walking ATM. I financed their lives, their dreams, their celebrations, and in return received crumbs of attention and respect. But now, for the first time, I had a clear view of how they really saw me. And if they wanted to treat me like a bank, maybe it was time to start acting like one. Banks have terms, conditions, and most importantly, consequences when contracts are broken. It was time to do a complete audit of my family account, and decide if this relationship still offered a return on investment. I returned home with a determination I hadn't felt in years. My downtown Chicago apartment, with its panoramic view of the city, suddenly felt like a refuge from the toxicity I had normalized for so long. I turned on my main computer and began doing something I should have done a decade ago, a complete financial audit of the Patterson family. As the data loaded, James arrived with a bottle of bourbon and a grim expression. "Man, you need to hear what happened after you left. Tell me everything." His mother walked past the table where I was sitting and asked if I had seen you around. "When I told her you had tried to get in but had been turned away," she laughed. She literally laughed, Greg. And she said, "Oh, he'll get over it. Greg always understands these things. He's too mature for drama." Mature for drama. Translation: conditioned to accept any humiliation without question. "There's more," James continued, pouring 2 generous shots. "I heard Jennifer telling a group how you always show up wanting to be the center of attention at family events. She said you decided to have a more refined celebration without the complicated personalities." Complicated personality. Me, who had paid for the dress she was wearing, the gift she gave her parents, probably even the babysitter who was watching her kids that night. I opened my main bank account and started pulling up detailed reports. Every PIX transfer, every deposit, every bill I had paid for family members. The accounting software I used for clients became my personal investigation tool. "James, you work in data analysis. Can you help me with something?" "Sure." We spent the next 2 hours building a spreadsheet that would have been comical if it weren't so tragic. $283,457 over 10 years. Not to mention the interest that money could have earned if it had been invested properly. "My God, Greg," James muttered, looking at the numbers. "With that money, you could have bought a beach house. Or 2 smaller houses," I replied bitterly. "Or taken that trip around the world I've always dreamed of." But the worst was yet to come. As we organized the data by category, a sinister pattern emerged. The family emergencies always coincided with important social events. The urgent roof repair had been 3 weeks before a wealthy cousin's wedding. Jennifer's financial crisis coincided exactly with the elite school enrollment season for their children. "They planned this," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a bolt of lightning. "These aren't emergencies. They're strategies." James pointed to a series of transfers last summer. "Look at this. $12,000 in June for urgent medical expenses for his father. But look here on the credit card statements you showed me, they took a trip to the Bahamas in July. Medical expenses. Luxury vacations." The lie was so blatant it was impressive. My phone rang. It was my mother. "Greg, honey. We missed you so much at the party tonight. I hope you understand, it was a more intimate affair, you know how it is." I put it on speaker so James could hear. "Hi, Mom. How was the celebration?" "Wonderful. Your brothers were so thoughtful. Jennifer organized a beautiful tribute, and Michael gave a touching speech about family. You would have been proud of them." "Proud of my brothers who didn't contribute a penny to the party that cost me $40,000. "That's great, Mom. I'm sure it was special." It was. "By the way, Greg, your father is a little concerned about some bills that came in today. You know how anxious he gets about these things. Could we talk tomorrow about a little help?" 3 hours after excluding me from the party I paid for, she was already asking for more money. The audacity was impressive. "Sure, Mom. What kind of bills?" "Oh, you know, the usual stuff. The credit card was a little high this month because of the party, and there are some outstanding bills with the caterer." Outstanding bills with the caterer. The caterer I had paid in full the week before. "No problem, Mom. We'll talk tomorrow." After I hung up, James looked at me in disbelief. "She's got some nerve." "It's not nerve," I replied, a cold clarity taking hold of me. "It's certainty. They are absolutely certain that I will always pay, always accept, always understand." I opened my laptop again and started doing something I had never done before, researching every member of my family on social media. What I found made me question my own sanity over the past few years. Jennifer's Instagram, photos of expensive dinners at Chicago restaurants, designer clothes, frequent vacations. All posted around the same time she was calling me for financial help with basic necessities. Michael's Facebook, check-ins at fancy bars, photos of expensive electronic gadgets, weekend trips. A lifestyle incompatible with someone who was struggling to survive as a student. My parents' profile, photos of their newly renovated house which I had financed, their new car, a loan I had guaranteed, dinners at social clubs, annual fees I paid. "James, look at this," he said, showing me a photo of my parents at a five-star restaurant from the previous week. They were having dinner at Le Bernardin the night before they called me asking for money for the party. Le Bernardin. $300 per person. The same day my mother cried on the phone about financial difficulties. The anger that had been simmering all day finally crystallized into something more powerful, cold, calculated determination. For years, I had operated under the assumption that we were a family with temporary financial difficulties. But the truth was very different. They had an active and expensive social life, secretly financed by me, while keeping me isolated from that same social life. "I'm going to do something I should have done a long time ago," I announced to James. "What?" "I'm going to treat this like any other bad investment in my portfolio. I'm cutting my losses." James smiled for the first time in hours. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" I looked at the spreadsheet on the screen, then at the photos on social media, and finally at the receipt for the $40,000 transfer I had made to a party I had been excluded from. A plan began to form in my mind, elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its implications. "They want to treat me like a bank, James. And banks have very specific policies about default and breach of contract." I grabbed my phone and started making some calls. First to my personal lawyer, then to the company accountant, and finally to a private investigator I had used in corporate fraud cases. If my family wanted to play a game of financial manipulation, they had just discovered they had picked the wrong opponent. I wasn't just the naive son they could exploit indefinitely. I was an experienced financial advisor with resources, connections, and for the first time in 10 years, real motivation to use both. The golden wedding party was over for them, but my investigation was just getting started. Monday arrived with the precision of a Swiss watch, and I was in my office at 6 in the morning, 3 hours before the normal start of the workday. I had spent the entire Sunday developing what I mentally called Operation Family Audit. If they wanted to treat me like a bank, I would behave exactly like a financial institution that had discovered systematic fraud. My first call was to David Chun, the private investigator who had helped me expose a money laundering scheme at a client company 2 years earlier. David had access to public databases that I couldn't access on my own. "Greg, man, it's been a while. What can I do for you?" "I need a complete financial investigation on 4 people. Credit reports, public tax returns, property, investments, anything that's legal to access. Family or business?" "Technically, family. But treat it as business." I gave David my parents' and siblings' information, explaining that I suspected discrepancies between what they told me about their financial situation and the reality. Within 24 hours, I had a complete picture of who they really were financially. My second call was to Amanda Rodriguez, my personal accountant, a brilliant woman who had transformed my tax situation from chaotic to exemplary in 3 years. "Amanda, I need a delicate favor. Can you help me structure a document that formalizes family loans as legitimate business transactions?" "Sure, but may I ask why?" I explained the situation without going into emotional details. Amanda had seen similar cases, families exploiting financially successful members to the point of exhaustion. "Greg, this is more common than you think. I'll prepare retroactive loan agreements with standard commercial interest rates. Legally, you have the right to formalize these transactions and demand payment." While waiting for the results of the investigation, I decided to do my own field research. I called my cousin Sophia, my mother's sister's daughter, who had always been the official family gossip. "Greg, what an amazing party yesterday, wasn't it?" "I couldn't make it, Sophia. Scheduling conflicts." "Oh, what a shame. Your parents looked so proud. Your mother was telling everyone how you kids got together to throw this wonderful party for them." "Interesting. Official version, the kids got together. Reality, Greg paid for everything himself." "Really? What else did she say?" "That the 3 of you planned everything together, each contributing your specialty. Jennifer with the organization, Michael with the social part, and you with, well, you know, the practical part." "Practical part. Elegant euphemism for picked up the tab. And people believed that? Of course. Everyone was impressed by the Patterson family unity. In fact, your mother mentioned that you're planning a big family trip next year. Europe, right? Family trip to Europe. First time I'd heard of it, but apparently I was already included in the planning, or at least my wallet was. Tuesday brought David's first report, and the findings were more shocking than I had anticipated. My parents, who claimed to be in constant financial difficulty, actually had a net worth of approximately $400,000. Their house was paid off, they had 2 cars, a robust savings account, and investments in stocks. Greg, not only are your parents not broke, they're financially comfortable, David explained over the phone. Their tax returns show they've had sufficient income to cover all expenses for the past several years. What about my siblings? Jennifer has a combined household income of $120,000 a year with her husband. Michael receives a $45,000 research grant, plus consulting work that he doesn't report properly. I was financing people who didn't need financing. For 10 years, I had been systematically deceived by a family that orchestrated financial crises to keep me as their source of extra income. On Wednesday, Amanda brought the retroactive loan agreements. $283,457, plus 6% compound interest per year, the standard rate for unsecured personal loans. The current total is $342,812, Amanda announced. Legally, you can demand full payment or set up a payment plan. $42,000 in interest alone. The value of a luxury car they owed me just for the opportunity cost of the money. What if they refuse to pay? You can sue. With all the documentation we have, it's a solid case. But I didn't just want my money back. I wanted them to understand exactly how they had treated me for a decade. I wanted them to face the consequences of their systematic manipulation. I wanted poetic justice. On Thursday, my mother called, as I had expected. Greg, honey, do you have a few minutes to talk about those bills I mentioned? Sure, Mom. But first, I wanted to ask you about the party. I heard it was wonderful. Oh, it was divine. Everyone commented on how well organized it was. We are so grateful for our children. That's good to hear. What about those bills? Well, the credit card bill was a little high, and there are some outstanding payments to the party vendors. Nothing too serious, but you know how your father gets. How much exactly? About $15,000. I know it's a little high, but you always understand these situations. $15,000 to cover expenses for a party I had already paid for in full. It was officially the last straw. Mom, I actually need to talk to you about something important. How about I come over on Saturday? We can talk about it then. That sounds wonderful. I'll make that chocolate cake you love. If you've been following this story and are curious about what Greg was planning, keep watching because what happened next was the kind of twist that changes everything forever. Friday was devoted to putting the finishing touches on my plan. I printed out all the financial reports, organized the loan agreements into neat folders, and prepared a PowerPoint presentation that I would use on Saturday. The title of the first slide was simple: Family Financial Audit, Results and Recommendations. I also prepared 3 sealed envelopes. Each contained a copy of the specific loan agreements for each family member, along with a detailed repayment schedule. Jennifer owed me $68,000. Michael owed me $75,000. My parents owed me the rest. But there was a 4th envelope, this one addressed to the entire family. Inside was my letter of resignation as the family ATM, effective immediately. On Saturday morning, I drove to my parents' house in Evanston for the last time as the dutiful exploited son. When I left a few hours later, our family dynamic would be completely different. Or there would be no family dynamic at all. I arrived at my parents' house at 2 in the afternoon, carrying a briefcase that contained the future of the Patterson family. My mother greeted me with a warm hug and a smile that I now recognized as purely transactional. Greg. It's so good to see you, dear. Your father is in the living room, and I called Jennifer and Michael too. I thought it would be good for us all to talk about the family finances. Of course she had called my siblings. Probably to share the psychological pressure and ensure that I couldn't refuse to help with an audience present. I entered the room where the whole family was gathered. Jennifer was on the couch with her princess smile, Michael was relaxed in the armchair as if he owned the place, and my father was reading the newspaper with his perpetually serious expression. The same setup as always. They were comfortable. I was being summoned to solve problems. "Well, Greg's here," my mother announced. "We can talk about those issues I mentioned." I opened my briefcase and took out the main folder. "Actually, Mom, I'm the one who needs to talk to you about some important financial issues." My father put down the newspaper, frowning. "What kind of issues?" "Audit issues," I replied calmly, handing out copies of a 20-page document. "I've spent the week doing a detailed analysis of all financial transactions between myself and this family over the past 10 years. Jennifer picked up the document with disinterest, but her expression quickly changed when she saw the numbers on the first page. "Greg, what is this?" "A complete report of every loan, transfer and payment I've made to each of you since 2014. Michael flipped through a few pages, his face turning pale. "Loans? You never said they were loans." "Interesting observation, Michael. On page 12, you'll find a legal analysis of the difference between loans and gifts. According to federal law, all of the transfers I made can be legally classified as loans, especially considering that you all promised to pay me back when things got better." My father finally gave it his full attention, adjusting his glasses to read better. $342,000? That can't be right. "It's absolutely correct, Dad. 283,000 in direct transfers, plus 6% compound interest per year, standard market rate." My mother sat down heavily, still trying to process the information. "But Greg, honey, those weren't. You always said they were to help the family." "And I did help. For 10 years. But I found out some interesting things this week." I took the second set of documents out of my briefcase. David Chun, licensed private investigator, conducted an independent financial analysis on each of you. The room fell silent. "Dad, you and Mom have a net worth of $400,000. Your house is paid off, you have investments, and you have substantial savings accounts. For the past 5 years, your combined annual income has been enough to cover all of your expenses without outside assistance." My father opened his mouth to protest, but I continued. "Jennifer, your combined household income is $120,000 a year. You are not struggling to make ends meet, as you claimed. Your tax returns show consistent luxury spending." Jennifer blushed. "You hired an investigator to spy on our family?" "I hired a professional to verify information you provided when applying for financial assistance," I corrected. "And Michael, your systems development consulting work generates about $30,000 a year that you don't report properly, in addition to your official scholarship." Michael exploded. "That's invasion of privacy." "It's a credibility check," I replied calmly. "Something you should have done years ago." My mother found her voice, trying to assume the maternal tone that always worked. "Greg, even if we have some resources, family is family. We'll always be here for you too." I laughed genuinely for the first time in days. "Mom, when was the last time any of you offered me help? Financial, emotional, or any kind?" Silence. "I'll answer that for you, never. In 10 years, there hasn't been a single occasion when you've shown concern for my well-being, my problems, or my needs." I pulled out the third set of documents. "These are screenshots of your social media from the last 2 years. Jennifer, you posted photos of dinners at expensive restaurants in the same weeks you called me asking for money for basic expenses." I showed them the printouts. "Michael, you bought $5,000 worth of gaming equipment in the same month you claimed you couldn't pay your rent." Their faces were a mixture of shock, anger, and something I had never seen directed at me before, fear. "And you, parents, took a trip to the Bahamas 3 weeks after asking me for $12,000 for your father's urgent medical expenses." My father tried to regain his authority. "Greg, you're exaggerating. Those were coincidences." "They weren't coincidences," I interrupted, pulling out another document. "I hired a data analyst to map the temporal correlations. 93% of your requests for financial assistance occurred between 1 and 3 weeks before significant spending on luxuries or entertainment. The evidence was overwhelming, and everyone knew it. But the best part," I continued, "was finding out about the golden wedding anniversary." Everyone tensed up. You told me the party would cost $25,000. It actually cost $53,000. I paid $40,000, and you guys covered only $13,000, the exact amount you asked me to borrow the following week. Jennifer tried a different approach. Greg, you're being very cold. We're your family. Family? I asked, taking out my phone. I'm going to play back some conversations I've discreetly recorded over the last few days. I pressed play on a recording of my cousin Sophia recounting how my mother had lied about all the children contributing to the party. Then a recording of James describing the cruel comments they had made about me during the celebration. And finally, I said, connecting my phone to the TV, some photos from the golden wedding anniversary party. The images appeared on the screen. They were celebrating, laughing, toasting. In one particular photo, my mother was showing someone the pearl necklace I had bought her last Christmas, while saying something that made her laugh. James got the audio of this specific conversation, I explained, turning up the volume. My mother's voice came out of the speakers. Greg has always been our most generous son. Sure, he doesn't understand much about social life, but he's very useful when we need practical things. Useful. The word echoed in the silent room. So, here's the situation, I announced, returning to my briefcase. You have two options. I distributed the sealed envelopes I had prepared. Option 1, you formally acknowledge that all transfers were loans, sign these retroactive contracts, and establish a 5-year payment plan. Total, $342,812. My father opened his envelope, read it quickly, and turned pale. Greg, that's impossible. We can't pay that kind of money. Option 2, I continued, ignoring the protest. I sue all of you for civil fraud and emotionally for systematic financial manipulation. My lawyer assures me it's a solid case, especially with all the evidence I've gathered. Michael stood up abruptly. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. Jennifer tried tears, her oldest strategy. Greg, please, you're destroying our family. I'm not destroying anything, Jennifer. I'm just stopping financing the destruction of my own dignity. I took the last envelope from the briefcase. But there is a third option that you will prefer. Everyone looked at me with desperate hope. You can accept that our financial relationship ends today. Permanently. Never ask me for money again, never expect me to pay for anything, never count on me to solve your financial problems. I paused to let that sink in. In return, I consider the $283,000 a final parting gift. You keep the money, I keep my freedom. The relief on their faces was palpable until I continued. But there are conditions. First, if any of you contact me asking for money in the next 10 years, I will automatically invoke option 2, lawsuit for fraud. Second, if anyone spreads lies about me to other family members, I will sue for defamation. Third, I accept that you may not invite me to family events, but you will never again pretend that I am welcome while using my money to pay for them. I looked each one in the eye. You have 48 hours to decide. I will leave my answer in writing on Monday. I stood up, closed the briefcase, and headed for the door. Oh, and about that $15,000 you wanted to cover the outstanding expenses for the party? I found out there are no outstanding expenses. What you have is that you spent the money I sent you on other things, and now you need to cover the whole. At the door, I turned around one last time. For 10 years, you treated me like a bank. Now you know how banks behave when they discover fraud. The door closed behind me, leaving them alone with the reality that his personal ATM had just become permanently inaccessible. Monday arrived with a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. I woke up in my apartment without the familiar anxiety that had accompanied me for a decade, that constant feeling of waiting for the next emergency that would drain my bank account. At 9 in the morning, exactly 48 hours after my ultimatum, I got a call from Jennifer. Her voice trembled with barely contained anger. Greg, we've talked as a family and we've chosen option 3. But I want you to know that you're destroying relationships that can never be repaired. Understood, Jennifer. I'll put it in writing today. And another thing, she continued, showing her true colors. Don't be surprised if other relatives find out how you're treating your own family. Actually, Jennifer, feel free to tell them. But be sure to mention the $283,000 you owe me, and how I found out you lied about your financial situation for a decade. Silence. Then the sound of the phone being hung up abruptly. Michael called an hour later, trying to appeal to nostalgia. My parents attempted one last coordinated manipulation at the end of the day. Everyone agreed to the third option, but only to avoid legal consequences. Starting on Tuesday, I began receiving unexpected phone calls. First it was my cousin Rebecca, who had been at the golden wedding anniversary party. "Greg, I heard from Jennifer about what happened. She's trying to paint you as the villain, but I was there. I saw how they talked about you. And I wanted to tell you that you did the right thing. I always thought it was strange how you were never at family celebrations, but your gifts were always the most expensive." My Uncle Robert called to apologize and propose a payment schedule for the $5,000. Apparently, my cousin Sophia had spread details of the investigation, and several relatives were re-evaluating their interactions with me. The most surprising revelation came from my Aunt Catherine, my mother's sister. "Greg, I need to tell you something. Your grandmother Eleanor left a letter for you before she died. She asked me to give it to you when you woke up to the situation," in her words. My grandmother Eleanor had been the only person in the family who had ever treated me with genuine respect. The letter revealed a bank account with $50,000 that she had saved specifically for when I freed myself from this dynamic. On Thursday, I received a completely unexpected call from the event planner at Palazzo Gardens, offering free services as a formal apology for the golden wedding embarrassment. Friday brought the finalized legal document, the formalization of the end of my financial relationship with my family. Amanda had crafted an agreement that protected both parties. They got the money, I got my freedom. But the biggest transformation was happening inside me. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based on what I wanted, not what my family needed. I started planning that world trip I had always dreamed of. "Man, you look 10 years younger," James remarked. "I feel reborn," I admitted. I had no idea how much weight I was carrying. 3 months later, I threw my own party at the Palazzo Gardens, a gathering to thank the people who truly valued me. This time, I was genuinely surrounded by people who cared about me, not my wallet. My parents and siblings weren't invited, and for the first time, that exclusion was my conscious choice. 6 months after my ultimatum, my life was unrecognizably better. Financially, I was able to accelerate my retirement plans by 5 years. Emotionally, the constant anxiety had disappeared. Socially, I discovered authentic relationships. Occasionally, I heard news through relatives. My parents adjusted their lifestyle without my secret financial support. Jennifer canceled her home renovation plans. Michael finally got a real job. They survived and thrived in a more honest way. The most valuable lesson I learned was that true love is never conditional on financial resources. Healthy relationships are based on mutual respect, not utility. And sometimes, the greatest demonstration of self-love is walking away from people who only value us for what we can provide. Today, when someone asks me to borrow money, I have clear conversations about terms and expectations. Not because I've become cold, but because I've learned that honest relationships thrive on transparency, not manipulation. My wallet may be fuller, but my heart is infinitely lighter. And that's a trade I would make again, without hesitation. If this story has touched you in any way, if you recognize similar patterns in your own life, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your own experiences in the comments. Remember, you are worth more than what you can provide to others. Your value is inherent, not transactional. And it's never too late to redefine relationships based on mutual respect.